where is the location? I mean, this is going to YouTube?
We're going to transmit at the conference, at the hybrid conference, and then after that, it will be transmitted when we go to YouTube with all other.
So it will be available for people to watch it later.
Yep.
Okay. Excellent.
Unless you don't want it to, and then.
Oh no, I have no problem.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd like to see how you two try to understand my English and create the subtitles. That will be an interesting experiment for me to check if my English is reasonable, is good enough. So I will show the screen. This one. So, do you see my screen there?
Yep.
Okay, excellent.
So where are you from, Guilherme?
I'm from Brazil, Juiz de Fora, Minas Gerais.
I'm at São Paulo.
So we have a GitHub repo with some code that we will working with. So I invite you to clone that repository that says is shared in the chat. Given that I didn't know how many people will join us, I prepare like different options for this workshop, right? So given that we are just a couple of us, I will pick the version of this workshop for this size, let's say. That means that we will be working with Java, okay? And in that repository, you will find a Ruby version and a Java version. The Java version just requires Java 8 and Maven. That will be enough. And of course, the editor of your choice, right? I will be using IntelliJ. So if some of you want to code, you may share your GitHub user, and I will grant you access in the repository. Or if you prefer, you can fork the repository, okay? And I think that we should start, okay? Yep. Okay, let's start. Hello, welcome. My name is Nicolas Paez, and I'm speaking English because I'm from Argentina, and I speak Spanish, English, but not Portuguese. So this is the best I can do, just to offer you Spanish or English, and I think that English will be better for you, okay? And unless all of you prefer my Spanish, it's the same for me. Okay. Okay, Priscilla, I just watch English. Okay, perfect. So this is the workshop. Well, let me tell you a bit about me. I work in the industry and also in the academia. During the mornings, I usually working with customers doing development. And during the afternoon, I usually working on the university I'm professor and researcher. I'm mainly professor and I work in some research projects, right? And I've been involved with TDD for a long time. These are some of my publications, all of them, or most of them related to agile development. Most of them are freely available. So then you can, at the end of the slides, you will find the links in case you want to access them, right? And I would like to know a bit about you and TDD, right? So we have a link. I will share this in the chat so you can access directly. Well, this is just a shortcut that will lead you here. So are you seeing the other? I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm sharing at this point. So do you see the screen with the different columns? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So this is just to have an idea of what you know about TDD, how familiar are you. Let me tell you a bit about me. I started with TDD in 2005. At that time, I was a student, and I was part of the teaching team of one subject that we were teaching object-oriented programming, and the professor told us, well, guys, the next semester we will start teaching extreme programming and TDD, so you should study this. And that was my first contact with TDD. And we started teaching TDD, and I tried to apply it in my job, but I couldn't. It was not possible. I don't know why, but I tried and I couldn't. But at the same time, I continued teaching this at the university and asking my students to apply TDD. And of course, during the classes, I practiced TDD, but what happened is that the kind of challenges we faced during the class were like easy problems, let's say. Some years later, I tried again. I think that it was 2008, something like that. I tried because it was a new job for me. So in the new job, I tried to apply it again, and no way again. Finally, 2 hours later, I read a book by Steve Freeman and Nat Price. And that book changed my life. After reading that book, I understand how to apply TDD in the real world, let's say. So since that moment, 2010, I think, more or less, till now, I've been practicing TDD in all my development projects. And of course, I continue teaching this at the university. So that is what I want to share with you during this workshop, the lesson learned during these, let's say, 10 years using TDD in the industry, right? So I won't ask you to tell your own story, but just use this slide, and I invite you to pick one square, put your name, and place it in one of these columns. What do you know about TDD? Just theory? Maybe you try to use it, but quit, like I did in 2005. Maybe you use it from time to time. Maybe you use it for certain situations, certain part of your code, or maybe you are using it, let's say, all the time. So just pick one square, put your name, and place it in the column that you consider reflects your situation. Is it okay, my English? Do you want me to speak slower?
think it's okay, Nico. Just Bri asked, what's the name of the book? And I assume it's GOOS, right? Growing Up Object-Oriented Software
exactly.
Guided by Tasks.
I will share that later, but yes, that is the book.
Cool.
Hi.
Okay. It seems that you use it from time to time. Okay, excellent. So let's go back to the presentation. Complete it if you want. Daniela, just theory, okay. Let me open this again. So this is the high-level agenda that I prepared for this. First of all, I want to do a very brief review about what is guiding development with tests. Then I will just review some design guidelines, very high level, and then we will go to work on the challenges that TDD bring us and some heuristics, recommendations, tips to work with it. Okay. So this is the repository where we will work, and in particular, inside that repository, we will work on, excuse me, branch that's not called Agile Brazil, it's called TDD Heuristics. So for those of you who want to code, or maybe you just want to take code for checking later, just clone that repo, go to that repository, and using npm test, if you have maybe already installed, this will run the tests. And if you want to run the application, Spring Boot run also with Maven, this will run the application. Okay? Let me tell you a bit about this application that we will use for the workshop. So it's a very simple application. It's like a shopping cart API that just offers you two endpoints, two features. One feature to add an item to a cart, and another endpoint, another feature to check out, right? So when the idea is that you add items to a cart and then you do the checkout and the final amount to pay is calculated, right? So in terms of the design of the application, you will find that we have an HTTP controller that is part, let's say, of the infrastructure. Then we have like an application facade that's a shop object, a shop class, let's say. And then we have some domain objects, basically a cart and items that are added to the cart, right? So let me show this in code just for you to have an idea. Let me check, because I was working with this yesterday. I'm not sure if I push the latest version. Okay, it seems that everything is up there. So I don't know if you are familiar with Spring Boot. Yes, no, more or less.
Used to be.
Can you speak or maybe raise your hand? Are you familiar with the Spring Boot?
No.
No. Okay. Felipe? Luis Felipe?
Yes, sorry. Yes, I tried to start learning it.
Okay, excellent. And what about Guilherme and Andre? Not sure if they are listening. Okay, anyway, I will give you just a brief idea of how this application is structured. We don't use many features of a Spring Boot, right? But anyway, I will show you a bit so you can follow the code, right? So I have an application controller. This is a REST controller. This is provided by Spring Boot. And here I have defined one of my endpoints, the one to add an item. Here is the URL where this endpoint is exposed. And I say that it receives and returns JSON. And basically, as you can see, I receive some parameters, and this controller just delegates the logic to this shop object. That this shop object is automatically injected by Spring, right? Spring takes care of creating an instance of the application controller and will inject an instance of this shop here in the constructor, right? And then we have the checkout that is basically the same structure. In this case, it's a HTTP GET. Also receives some parameters, and again, it delegates the logic to the shop, right? And then it returns some values that Spring Boot take care of serializing this into JSON, right? And then I have one additional endpoint here that is just for testing purposes, right? In a real world application. Well, I would create also this reset endpoint just to enable me to run some tests, but this endpoint should not be available, of course, in a production environment, okay? And then we have, of course, this shop object with just a few logic to coordinate the interaction between the car and the item, right? So if you want to run the test, of course, you can run the test from the command line with npm test, or if you are using, like me, IntelliJ, just run test, and this will run a couple of tests that are already coded, right? So as you will see, I have some, let's say, unit tests for my card object, some other tests for my item object, and I have here some tests for my application. This test would be test from the user perspective, let's say. As you can see, each of them are associated with the two features the application is providing, right? I decide to use this as the starting point because in some other workshops I deliver previously, let's say, I discovered that creating the whole project from scratch takes too much time. So I prefer to say, well, let's start with something that it's already working, right? So I want to present this at the beginning, right? And we will now start to exploring some TDD concepts, but you already have this at your hands, so you can browse it and run the test and that stuff. Yep. And then we will review some concept of TDD and we'll see how they match with this solution. Okay. So I go back to the slides.
So Nico, let me ask you a question. I guess I have the wrong one because I have the code that I have here is for a semáforo.
Yeah, check out this branch, please. The branch is called TDD Heuristics, like the repository name.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
I'm sorry. So when you asked me, my microphone was not working and I need to change some cables and things like that. I'm sorry. But I'm here.
No problem. So, are you already familiar with Java and Spring, Guilherme?
Yes, I am.
Okay, excellent. So, let's review some concepts before putting our hands on code, right? So, let's start with this, right? I don't know if you have read this book. It's an old book. I think that is the first book about TDD. You know, Ken Beck started with the TDD idea in the 90s, and he published that, I think, for the first time in the XP book. And then in 2003, more or less, he published this book about TDD specifically. This is an interesting book, but in my opinion, it was not very useful. Have any of you read this book? No. Yeah. Well, let me tell you a bit about this book. This book is great to understand the basic ideas of TDD, but it's not useful to apply TDD in a real-world project. And let me tell you why. Because the book starts telling you some theory, and then they have a very interesting example, but that example is around two classes, right? So most of the book is about the money class, and it's excellent how Beck developed that class and the features, but then you go to your project and you have a web application and a database, legacy code, and all full of things that Ken Beck didn't mention in his book, right? The book doesn't cover that accidental stuff. So it's difficult after reading this book to fill that gap between this awesome theory and your real project, right? At the same time, something that happened after reading this book, many people get the idea that TDD is about unit tests, because the guy along the book works with classes and he used JUnit. So it's not difficult to think, oh, okay, this is about just testing my models, testing my domain objects, right? But that's not true, right? This idea of guiding our development with tests is not only for domain objects. It's a way of development at different scale also, right? This is the basic idea, right? Write a test, try one test, make it fail, then make it pass, refactor, and you already know this picture, let's say, and it's okay, right? But you know, some years later, after the publication of this book, some people start talking about, well, this idea is not only for unit tests. We can apply this at requirements level, right? And in order to distinguish between the unit test-driven development, they adopted some other terms that today we know those terms have BDD, behavior-driven development, specification by example, acceptance test-driven development. The idea is exactly the same, right? Guide your development with tests, and they don't have to be unit tests, right? You may find some small differences between behavior-driven development and specification by example, but the main idea is the same. Start with examples, right? Those examples are tests, right? But our tests expressed from the user perspective, right? In 2010, these guys make an interview to Ken Beck, and I really recommend this interview. Is published on the web, you can find it. And the guy that is guiding the interview asked Ken Beck about these other techniques. Hey, what do you think about BDD, Cucumber, Gherkin, and those old stuff that was getting too much traction at that time? And he said, well, that's TDD. That was my idea. I just wrote a book with focus on unit tests to make that easy to understand. But the idea of TDD is just guiding your development with tests. It doesn't matter how granular those tests are. It doesn't matter the level of abstraction you manage. The idea is the same. Don't write code that is not guided with that test. Right? So this is the book that I was mentioning that changed my life. Right? This is growing object-oriented software guided by tests by Steve Freeman and Nat Price, two guys that lives in London, I think. And they present this. And this is what brought me the light, right? So you guide to development with tests, but you have like two order of tests. You have tests that are from the user perspective that speak about the features your application has to deliver. And of course, you write that test from the user perspective, and to make that test pass, you will need to create several low-level components, several classes, methods, controllers, services, entities, whatever you need, right? And to create those low-level components, you will use what Ken Beck mentioned in his previous book, right? So in order to complete a whole round, you will write one acceptance test, and to make that single acceptance test to pass, you will have several rounds around these. You may need several unit tests to make this pass, right? That's the key idea. And it's interesting because for me, it was very revealing because this fits excellent with the development process. If you just pick Ken Beck idea of this, it is difficult to make this fit. It was difficult for me to make this fit in my development process. I felt that there was like a gap, but this idea fits excellent, right? So are you familiar with this? Are you using TDD at this level, let's say acceptance test level? Have you ever used that?
I have used that when I coded pretty much, so pretty extensively. And then sometimes it's easy, sometimes we get to that point where we don't quite know what is the easiest or the simplest acceptance test. So I admit that sometimes I skipped something there and just coded a little bit more than I should before writing the test. But I tried to do that as much as possible back then.
Excellent.
And
anyone else?
This is the difficult of the things, right? So which level of the things we will test? So we spend more time discussing, for example, which level, right? We'll test as doing the test, you know.
Excellent. Well, we will discuss about this along the workshop, okay? So let me share some additional stuff here. Well, maybe you're already familiar with this. This is called the test automation pyramid, right? It's supposed to guide us when we know how many tests to add, or maybe what kind of tests to add and how many of them, right? So the idea of the proposal of this simple idea, I think that is an idea by Mike Kong. I think he's the author of this idea, that he suggests that given that unit tests are easy to write, easy to run, they provide very specific feedback. So it would be great if we would use a lot of unit tests, but the problem is that unit tests, you may have many units working well, but the application may not work well. So unit tests are not enough. On the other side, you have end-to-end tests that reflect exactly what the user wants, but doing those tests that interact with the application at the UI level are difficult to run, are fragile, are difficult to code, are slow. They don't provide good feedback because if the test failed, you don't know if the problem is in your entity, in the database, in the controller. The feedback is not specific. So we should try to find a trade-off between end-to-end and unit. And of course, you may have some tests at the API level, right? So the proposal of this idea of the test pyramid is just have a pyramid or a triangle, right? So just a couple of tests at the UI level, end-to-end tests, and a lot of tests at the bottom of the pyramid because they are easy to write and they have all those benefits, right? It's interesting when we try to mix this idea with the other idea by Freeman and Paez. So, of course, this is at the unit level, and at these tests, at what level are they? What are these acceptance tests? Well, if you check the book, Freeman recommends that these acceptance tests to be end-to-end, right? But that's not the only option we have. We could write acceptance tests following this definition of acceptance test, that is also a definition by Freeman, right? We could have acceptance test at the unit level, right? The point of the acceptance test is that it reflects the user intention. So if the user intention is maybe just a calculation, well, that calculation may be mapped into some specific objects. So your acceptance test may be like unit tests, right? That makes sense. That's okay. It's not what Freeman proposed. He proposed this acceptance test to be like end-to-end. But in some situations, it may make sense to have some acceptance tests that are not end-to-end, right? So, are we okay at this point? Yeah. Do you want to add something, ask something? No. Okay. So, something that is important when we try to practice TDD, or even when we try to write automated tests, it doesn't matter if you write the test before and after your code, is what's the application, what's the architecture of your application. Depending on the architecture of the application, you will be able or not to write some specific tests, right? If you go 20 years later, when many people was writing PHP applications, it was quite common to have just one PHP file with some parsing logic, some database logic, some business logic, some rendering logic with the HTML, everything in just one file. Well, in that situation, you didn't have many options to write tests. The only option was to write like end-to-end tests because the application was not well modularized, right? So if you want your application to be testable, you need to follow some basic guidelines, see? And one of those guidelines is to follow the hexagonal architecture. I don't know if you heard about this idea. It's a very simple idea. It's a quite old idea. I think that the term was coined by Alistair Cockburn, I think that maybe 15 years ago, something like that. He previously called these ports and adapter pattern, right? And then he renamed this as hexagonal architecture. And this idea is also shared by Freeman in the book. The idea is very simple. Just keep apart what is your business logic from all the other stuff that is related to infrastructure and managing of inputs and outputs. Make your business logic independent of that stuff. Use some interfaces to be able to abstract your business logic from all the infrastructure. Basically, that's the central idea of this pattern. right? If you follow this, you will be fine trying to add automated tests. And something interesting about this idea is that it's like orthogonal to any application architecture. I mean, your application may be structured in layers, or maybe MVC, or maybe events, or pipes and filter. It doesn't matter. This idea of hexagonal architecture can be applied to in conjunction with any architectural pattern, right? This figure is from Freeman Books, and this other picture is from a post by the Netflix engineering team. I will share the link at the end, but it's a post that they share how this applied this idea in his architecture. I added because it's interesting to just to show that this idea is not like an academic or laboratory idea. It has been used by first-class companies in the industry, right? Something else about this, well, domain design is another technique that is commonly used in conjunction with TDD and object-oriented design, the stuff, solid principles, object-oriented principles. Okay, that's enough as a background for our TDD challenge. So now I want to know, what are the challenges you see when you apply TDD, when you try to apply TDD? So I will ask you to enter this Menti. Maybe I can copy this link. Sure, sorry, the other one I think is correct, this one. Oh, it's the same, okay. Yeah, because you can access with the code or with the direct link. So if you enter here, you will find 5 boxes. The idea is you write the challenges you perceive when you try to apply TDD, right? What you usually experiment when you are trying to apply this.
Nicolas, I changed my level there in that presentation because I don't code, so maybe I don't use it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
just...
but maybe if you want to write some thoughts, some things that you think that may be a challenge, even when you don't apply this, you're welcome to share it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. The same applies for all of you. Maybe if you are not applying TDD, but maybe you have a friend, or you were part of a team that tried but couldn't, or, well, the idea is to think about this, right? Try to identify what are the challenges. You know, how popular do you think it is TDD? You know, if we enter a technology conference and we ask about Scrum, possibly everyone knows about Scrum, over 90%, right? And at the same time, most of them, it's possible that already have some experience applying Scrum with different level of success, right? And of course, in some cases, we could debate if that is a Scrum or not, but a lot of people have a perception that they are applying Scrum. But what about TDD? If we go to a technology conference, if we go to the RubyConf, for example, and we ask about TDD, what do you think you will get? Most of the people knows about TDD. How many of them are applying TDD?
Well, I think it's very common to be used in some stories templates when we specify the criteria for that story to be accepted. So we are probably most people are familiar with that format. When I do something, sorry, given that, when I do, then I think this is on top of the mind of people.
Yeah. And do you think that people then goes and write the automated tests before writing the code?
I think so, but I'm not sure if everybody does this.
Okay.
I guess it varies depending on the technology. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Ceci. Okay, I believe that is a half percentage, you know, so 50-50, you know. Some of the tests, they already know that we're working and it's not 100% first, you know.
Ceci?
So I guess it depends on the technology that is being used. For instance, the Rails folks used to be very good at it, at writing the tests and being test first, and then not so much for Java folks, which are more of my personal experience. So we saw a lot, like if I was to guess in the Java community, I would say like 10-15% of people actually write tests first.
Interesting. Well, let me share with you some facts, right? If you start checking surveys, it doesn't matter if they are industrial surveys or academic surveys, formal surveys, let's say, TDD is not being used very much. In fact, it's interesting because many people knows about TDD. Many people knows about this idea. So it's very popular in that terms. Everyone, let's say, everyone knows what it is. But then when you ask, but do you apply it? Do you write your test before writing your application code? It's not so many people. For example, you can check the annual report published by version 1, that is a company, so it's an industrial survey. You will find that TDD adoption is about 30%. And if you check some academic studies, you will find that they agree. They are. I have seen several studies. In fact, I did my self studies, and TDD is under 25%. Right. Of course, there are people that applies. You may have a team, one guy that applies TDD on his own, or people that applies TDD at certain part of the code sometimes. But if we talk about, let's say, a standardized practice, well, it's just 20%, 30%. That is what the evidence shows us, right? And the question is why? Why? Maybe it's not so good. Maybe it doesn't make a difference, right? What I have found talking with people about TDD is that sometimes they are like comparing, you know, I don't know if this phrase exists in English or in Portuguese, but in Spanish we say comparas peras y bananas. You are comparing apples and bananas, right? Because why I say this? Because some people compare us doing TDD with just writing the code without tests. No. You are cheating me. The code comes with tests. It's not optional. So if you want to talk about TDD and productivity and that stuff, you have to compare writing the code with the tests. before and after. But comparing TDD with another solution without tests, we are talking about different things. We are talking about pears and bananas, right? So if we focus this discussion in, hey, should we write the test after or before? Well, in that case, that's a valid discussion. And we will find that writing the code first will bring you some benefits, right? Of course, we can discuss about this. It's a valid discussion. What it is not a valid discussion is comparing TDD with not writing tests at all, right? So we have some challenges here. Engage people, start using TDD, granularity, discipline, scenarios. Okay, excellent. So I added my own challenges to this. I don't know if they are challenges, but beyond these challenges, there are questions about TDD when you try to start using it. And if we start our discussion here, the first question could be, should we write first this inner cycle test and then the big one? Or the other way, start with the big test and then write the small tests. Do you follow my idea? Yeah. These two strategies are very popular and they have names. I don't know if you have heard about this. One common name for this is outside in TDD or inside out TDD. That's the, let's say, the formal name. Then we have a more fancy name that's called Chicago and London. Yeah, have you heard about that? Chicago and London? Oh, okay. Let me tell you a bit about Chicago and London. This idea of Chicago and London was, let's say, created by Uncle Bob Martin. You already heard about him, sure. Excuse me? Okay, I thought that someone was talking. You know, you may find, if you Google this, you may find a series of videos by Uncle Bob and Sandro Mancuso. They started debating in Twitter, I think, some years ago about how to apply TDD. And after this discussion in Twitter, they joined and create a couple of videos solving the same problem, applying two different techniques or two different styles of TDD. Uncle Bob represents the Chicago style, also called inside out TDD, also called classic TDD. That means when you have to tackle a feature, you start working on the domain model. You start creating your entities, your classes. Let's say you start working in the inner cycle, doing TDD, let's say at the unit level or at the domain level, right? And then you add the user acceptance test at the big cycle, let's say, at the application level. That's the Chicago style. The other style is the London style. That's the style explained in the Freeman book, right? It's called London because Freeman lives in London, and it's called Chicago because Uncle Bob lives in Chicago, right? And in this London style, you start from the user perspective. You start outside in. You start with a user acceptance test, a test at, let's say, the story level. And guided by that, you start creating your application, let's say, from the UI, from the API, and then you go inside, and finally you write your domain classes, right? So that's one of the first questions when you want to apply TDD. You have to create a feature. So where should we start? Should we start with the domain classes, or should we start with the user acceptance tests? That's one of the first choices you have to do. I think that both of them has good points and bad points, but at the same time, in the end, I would say it's a matter of taste, right? What do you prefer? Because both of them has good and bads, right? I recommend you to see these videos by Sandro and Uncle Bob. I think that they are not freely available. I think you have to pay to access the videos. But beyond that, there are a lot of articles about that you can find, right? Even more, if you speak Spanish, more or less, there's a colleague, another professor in Buenos Aires called Hernan Wilkinson, that create a third style called Buenos Aires style, right? And he solved the same application that was solved by Uncle Bob and Sandro in a total different way. Well, in a different way, let's say. I don't know if total different, but in a different way. And those videos are freely available, right? You can find them TDD Buenos Aires style, and you will get these videos. I think that there are like 10 hours of video, because he developed a full solution, really, really interesting. And in my opinion, the most interesting part is not the TDD flow, but the design he creates. The way he designs the solution is very interesting for me. Well, so going back to our workshop, the point is, where do we start? We start with the inner cycle or with the outer cycle? What do you think about this? Opinions. There are no correct or incorrect answers.
Yeah, so I usually prefer to start from the outside and look for the customer. I guess it has a lot to do with the way I think about Agile these days, like thinking about the customer need and then figuring out how to get to that result. That used to be my preferred approach.
Excellent.
I am FCC.
Sorry, Guilherme, what do you say?
I am with CC in that.
Okay. Have you already worked this way? Yeah. Okay. It makes sense if we link this with what Priscilla was saying. If you start with writing your story and associated with your story, you write some acceptance criteria. And if you express that acceptance criteria with acceptance test, maybe using Gherkin or some other user-friendly tool or syntaxes, this idea match very, very good with that, right? So in order to start coding, I prepare here. Well, I already shared the code, so I want to add a feature to that code that I share, right? That is something very simple that is here. Like I mentioned, we can add items and then perform the checkout, but this new feature says that depending on the category of the item, we have to apply some taxes, right? The implementation you already have does not consider these taxes. So you add items and then the checkout just performs the sum, right? But this new feature requires us to apply taxes depending on the category on the items, right? This is the feature that we will try to add. So, okay, let's go outside in. So we should start by writing some, identifying, let's say, before writing, identifying some acceptance test for that feature, okay, given this. And that leads us to the next question. Where do we find examples? What are the tests that we should write, right? We already decided to start from outside. Well, now we have to write a test. What is the first test that we will write? Where do we find tests? Where do we find examples, right? That's a common question when we try to apply TDD. And for that, I want to suggest you a technique called example mapping. I don't know if you heard about this. It's a really interesting technique. I learned about this from the creators some years ago in an Agile conference. It was developed by the guys that are currently developing Cucumber, right? Seth Rose and that guys. And this example mapping is like a workshop activity that you run with your users. So you have a story and you go to a meeting with pencils and with paper of different colors, like what you see here, and you write in yellow the story, right? And associated to that story, you will have some rules, and associated to each of those rules, you should be able to provide an example, right? And while doing that in an interactive way, in a room, sitting next to your users, you may find some questions that you don't have the answer at that point. So for that, you will use the red cards to write your questions in order to get the answers after the workshop and before start the development, right? This is a very simple idea. I'm not sure if this is published in any formal publication. I learned the technique from the creators, and I know there are a couple of blog posts about it, right? So if you Google this, you will find those blog posts and with some details of how to apply it. It's very, very easy, right? I don't know if have any of you tried to apply this technique? No.
I've never seen this.
Okay, if you have the chance to work really close with your users, it's a great technique to find examples, right? So using this technique and given the scenario we are facing, we have the checkout rule that requires us to apply some taxes, right? I mean, the feature is add the taxes calculation, and the rules would be like this table, right? For food category, no taxes. For tool category, 10%. Office category, 20%, right? And we also have here another rule that we should enforce, that is the items should belong to these categories. I think that there is a error here. It should be tool, right? So if we pick this and we try to apply the example mapping technique, we will end with something like this. For the add item story, we have, for the add item to cart story, we have a rule that restricts the categories. So a happy case for that would be create an item with category food, and error case would be try to create an item with category pizza, right? So that would be two examples that will lead us to write two different tests for our application. And regarding the checkout, and given these table, right, these rules, well, the rule is that the tax is depending on the category. We should try to implement that. And if we have like 3 cases, the case for food, let's say that we buy an apple with unit price 5 and quantity 2. So the tax is 0 in this case, right? Because it's category food, no taxes. Then if we buy, not drinks, sorry, tool, well, beer is not a good example. Let's say hammer, right? Unit price 10, quantity 1, tax 1. Yeah, that's the example. And finally, if we buy a pencil that belongs to office category, unit price 1, quantity 10, the tax should be 2. Okay. So we decide to go outside in, and we have some examples. We have some tests for this outdoor cycle, right? These tests are acceptance tests from the user perspective, right? So let's try to write this in code, okay? And while we develop, we will be facing some other challenges, okay? So does any of you wants to code, or do you prefer that I take the keyboard and I code and you help me?
I wasn't able to find that code, really. So I checked, and there is just one branch, and the main branch is with the semaphores.
Let me check that.
Yeah.
Yes, that should be here. Let me check. Whoa. Where oh, sorry. I pushed this to another repository. Excuse me.
No worries. We could keep on in your machine. Maybe we can.
No, I moved this to this other repository. Sorry. It's in GitLab. Okay. I started this. I take the starting point from that repository that you have, and then I push to another one. Oh, excuse me. GitLab workshop. Let's check if this is open. I think it is open. Yeah, there you have it. So let me put this in the chat. And inside this repository, you have the TDD heuristics. Yeah. I move it here because this GitLab has already configured the CI stuff. So every time I push some code, it triggers the build and run the test and that stuff. So anyone wants to code? If not, it's okay. I will take the code. I will take care. Okay. No feedback, so I continue. Okay. So I will write, but I would like you to participate and guide me. I don't want to write everything myself. Okay. So where should we start here? We say that we want to go outside in, right? So the first thing that we should do is to write a test from the user perspective, right? So it's not a domain it's not a test with the domain objects, but it's a test at the application level, right? And at this point, we should pick, let's say, one of these examples, right? So let's start with the food that has no taxes, right? I think that in the case of the food, the test will run because no tax is applied to food, right? So it's like have nothing implemented yet. But anyway, let's add that test. Well, in fact, if you check the test that we already have, we have to work on the checkout, right? So the checkout, look at this test. It adds an item to the cart with certain price. It adds a second item. Then this code will run the, let's say, this would be the given, even when it is written with JUnit. This would be the when, and this would be the them, right? So these helper methods will create and post the new item to the cart, right? And well, we'll call the checkout, right? This will call the checkout and get the answer. And then I make an assert here, ensuring the total is 10 because I added 2 items of price 5. And this creates items with category food, right? So I think this first test is already okay, right? So let's work in the second one. Let's try to buy something that is not food, and that should fail, okay? So in order to do that, I will create a new test. No, I will use this one. I will this test like a template. When is it okay, the size of the letter? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
When check out tool items, taxes are applied. Okay. So I have to item. Well, we have, okay, I will do the following. Add item to cart with price, and here I will add a method, a parameter, additional parameter that will be the category, right? Category in this case will be tool, okay? This does not exist, so I don't want to modify this test because it will break the previous test. So I will add an overload to this with the category here. And now, after I will apply some refactoring to this test code, okay, in order to avoid duplication. But like Kenbeck says, first make it run, then make it right. Make it fast, make it right. So one item, no, I will use this example that was hammer. Well, the name of the item, it doesn't make sense because it's not applied and has no impact on the numbers that I get. What is relevant is the price, the quantity, and the taxes. So it says price 10, quantity 1, and taxes. This gives me the total. So I could expect here to have the total 11, but also if I want the taxes to be explicit, I will check for tax, and tax should be 1, right? So there is my test. Let's see if it runs. Okay, it failed. It failed because exactly, we were expecting 11 and we get 10. Okay, that's because it's not applying the taxes. Okay, so we are at this point. We have an acceptance test failing. So we should work now at the unit level, right? So for this, we go to our application, and given that what we are doing here, we are just modifying a business rule. So we should not have to change anything at the infrastructure level, right? We have our application controller here, and there's nothing new here, I think, because the way I add items is the same, and the checkout is still delegated to the shop. Yeah, we will have something different here, because if you look at this, the shop is just returning the total amount. It's not returning the taxes, right? And if we look at the way we wrote the test, we are expecting also the taxes. Yeah. So what I'm going to do here is I will split this example in two. Let's first have one test, right? Just returning the total with the current amount, and then I will add another test to make the taxes explicit, right? Because one of the things that we want to do when we apply TDD is work in small steps, right? So I think that having these two things in the same test will be, or will produce a bigger step, right? So in order to be able to continue working in small steps, I will not put this here. I will make this test pass, and then we'll have another one considering the taxes. Okay? Make sense? I mean, I will consider taxes, but I will not return the taxes.
Yeah, so we should do that for acceptance tests, because that's something that I would do for unit tests, like having separate tests for each parameter. But then maybe we'll go back and refactor it later, and then it will become one. But I just got curious if that's something that you would have, like one acceptance test for that would test one parameter, and then another acceptance test that would test the second parameter.
Well, it depends. In my opinion, it depends on how is the specific situation you have. What I like to do is to have really small stories. So from a user perspective, possibly I will split this into two stories: one to calculate the taxes and one to make the taxes explicit. So that would be like, in my opinion, is what I would like to do, is have two different backlog items. So this would be the acceptance test for the first story that calculate the taxes, and then I will have another user story that make the taxes explicit. So that way, I think that I have two small changes, and of course I would be able to deliver this one without having the tax explicit. Not always, of course, that will be a business decision, let's say. But this way, I will be able to show something to my user earlier, right? Because I'm making my feedback loop smaller. Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so if I go this way, I don't have to make any changes here at the application level, and I have just to work on the shop, right? And here, if we look at this shop object, the shop just get the corresponding card and delegate the calculation to the card, right? So the next question here would be, okay, we already have this test. And now, what would be our first test here in the inner cycle? What test should we do now?
Okay, everyone keeps quiet, so I'm gonna give it a go. So we have two options, right? We could do, we could write a shop test, and then, or we could go straight to the cart and start from the inner part of it, and then move to the mid part of the onion, maybe.
Yeah, excellent. We could go and test the shop or test the cart, right? And that also has names, that the strategies. So I think that I wrote somewhere here. Yeah. If we go with the London style, that is the way that we are following, then we have two options thinking on how to deal with the next test. Let me highlight this because this is the style that we are following. Let's say that we want to test the shop, but the shop depends on the cart. So from one point of view, we could say, well, I want to test the shop, and the shop, I want to test it alone. So from that point of view, I would mock all the shop dependencies. That if we look at the shop code, you will see that the code depends on the cart repository and also on the cart. So I will have to mock those dependencies, right? That is called the mockist approach, right? I go outside in, but given that I'm starting from the outside, I write a test against this big object. And what about his inner dependencies? I mock them. So I will have the test of the shop and the shop working okay, but I don't have tests for the inner objects. So first I ensure that the shop is working okay, and then I continue with the inner objects. Okay? In this case, we are working on code that is already existing, right? But we may face a situation when we know, when we have, maybe we have to add a new method, right? And the inner object does not exist yet. So I cannot complete the test of the shop because the dependencies does not exist. Well, unless I mock them, right? Do you follow me? So what would be the other option? Let me write some code here to make this situation more explicit. Let's say that we want to add here another method. It doesn't matter the name, right? And I know this name depends on a bank object, let's say, right? So if I want to test this method and the bank object does not exist, I have to mock the bank object. Yeah. This would be the mockist approach. What would be another possibility for this? The other possibility is what I call the chain approach. That is, I want to write this test, but this test depends on the bank object. So what I will do is leave this pending, leave the shop pending, and test and develop the bank object, right? So I complete the bank object, and then I continue with the test of the shop. That way I have no mocks, right? The bad part about that is that you started working on something and you make it pending, and you you go to another place and continue with another thing, right? So if your application is small, it may be no big deal, right? Because, well, I leave, like in this case, I leave this test open for a while. I go write the code on the card that will take me 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then I continue. But in bigger solutions, in more complex scenarios, maybe if I go and try to work on the backend object, maybe that may take me some hours. So in that case, I'm not sure if that is the best option, right? Is that okay? So this is like the second, let's say, strategy that we may face when we design, when we pick our style of TDD. And there's one more thing that we could do here. That is, if we look at this solution in particular, the shop has not logic beyond delegating to other objects. So something that I could do is say, well, go directly and work on the card, because given that I have a acceptance test, this code will be covered by the acceptance tests. If we measure, when we finish, we measure the coverage, these lines of code will be covered because they will be executed when I run the acceptance test. Do you follow me? Yeah. So given that this is a simple problem and we don't have much time, I will go and work directly on the card. Okay. So if I want to work on the card, here is the card, right? Well, I see I have just, we have some tests already created for the card, and I think I have just detected that the name of the test is incorrect. It should be without taxes. Yeah. Because now I want to add the test with the taxes. Okay. So again, here, what will be the test that we will add? Let's look at the test we already have. Let me put, I create a card, I create an item. In this case, I need this to be tool, right? Because it's the case that we are working. I have here another tool. Well, wait, what is the test I want to write now before doing this? I went too fast. What is the test I want to write here? Because I need to pick an example. What would be that example? I just copy paste this and like a robot, I follow the same code, but that's not the way. Let's think. What's the first example that we will want to write here? Do you have
the same one that we use for the acceptance test, right?
We could use the same one, yeah, the same case, because in this case we have like a one-to-one match between the acceptance test and what the application does, and that translates almost directly to this method in this class. So in this case, I could write the same, yeah, but in more complex scenario, it's not so direct, the link between the acceptance test and a test in a unit class, right? So in those cases, what should we do? How do you pick the first test? And for that, I will bring another scenario, another feature that makes that explicit. something that I invented is, let's say that we have to validate the category. Not all the categories are valid. Just 3 categories are valid, right? So I have 2 scenarios. The scenario when I try to get something with a valid category and the scenario with an invalid category. Which of them will you pick to start? Will you pick the happy path or will you pick the error path? Beyond this particular case, that applies to every situation when we apply TDD. You have a story, you have always at least one happy path, but usually those stories bring some error cases, some validations, some alternative path. So where do you start? Do you start with the happy path or do you start with the error or validation path?
The happy part.
The happy path. Okay. Why? There's a trade-off with that. I also prefer the happy path, but there's a trade-off there.
I like the happy.
Sorry, continue.
I like the happy because the first happy that I will write. So I don't have the implementation yet. Okay, so I just force the result. Okay, but in the second happy that I will wrote, we will break everything, you know. So I usually like to start with the happy part first. I feel more comfortable.
I agree with that. You see, yeah, but I see some trade-off here. The good part of starting with the happy path is that adds direct value to the user. Yeah, when you have the happy path, even without any validation, you can call the user and show him, hey, look at this, it is calculating, right? Something that you may not do with the error path. Hey, look at this. You cannot do it if you don't put valid information. That's not too attractive for the end user, right? That's one trade-off. The other trade-off that you have there, that's the good part of the happy path. The other interesting thing about the happy path is that give you more knowledge. When you implement the happy path, you have to complete your design, right? You will be able to create more objects and, like, let's say, have like a walking skeleton. That's something that usually does not happen with the error path, because the error path, you start following a path and the validation stop there. So it does not allow you to go further, right? Because given that we are following the TDD approach, we will write the code to make it fail the validation, and that's it. So the error path does not allow you to explore the whole situation, the whole scenario, right? At the same time, the good part of the error path is that it's fast. Completing the happy path may take you more time, right? In these cases that are really, really simple, well, in one case, it would be 5 minutes, and the other case will be 20 minutes. But in more complex situations, getting the error path will take you maybe 30 minutes, and completing the happy path may take you 2 days, right? In complex scenarios. So that's the trade-off. The happy path gives more value to the user, lets you explore better the situation, but it will take you more time. The error path will take you less time, but you will have less knowledge and is less attractive for the user.
Just to add a little spice in the talk, another problem of the happy path, if you complete all the half path, so everything's working fine, my happy path is okay. So why should I break everything with the errors? Let's give this to the QA. Let's see what he will find. But this is just, how can I say? It's just about mindset, you know. So trying to use, for example. So so who don't send, for example, a code that when you try with all the values null, for example, it's passing, you know, so with just zeros or something like that. It's it's part of our job, right?
Yeah. Well, in my case, I also like to start with a happy path, but it's not always my choice. I mean, depending on the specific feature I am developing, sometimes I don't go with the happy path and I start with the error path or with some validations or that kind of things, right? So something interesting to help us with this question beyond the happy path and the not happy path, because even the happy path, you may have different cases in the happy path. The happy path is not unique. And then we have to distinguish between what is the behavior and the test data we use for that behavior, right? Because even in the happy path, we will have different test cases depending on the test data we use. Something that I had found very useful for that is Let Me Guide by Zombies. I don't know if you have heard about this, right? TDD guided by zombies. This is a proposal by a guy called James Grenning, right? He wrote this in a book about C development. C. Carnegie and Ritchie, C language, yeah. Well, he was applying TDD in that context, and in his book, he mentioned this idea of TDD guided by zombies. His proposal, zombies is an acronym, and he proposed, well, start with the zero case. What would be the zero case? Well, exactly that, the case where you have nothing. So in our case, what would be case zero? Well, when you want to check out an empty card, right? That would be case zero. Right? What would be the next case to try? Well, try one. Try to check out a card with just one item. Then many. Then boundary behaviors. Pick one or several test cases when you exercise boundary situations, right? For example, we could say, well, what about checking out an item with a negative price? How should this work, right? Then we work on the interface definition, then we weigh with exceptional behavior, and then finally we work on simple scenarios and simple solutions, right? If you Google this, you will find a blog post, and you will find a video at the Agile Alliance website, because this was presented in the Agile Alliance conference, right? Sorry, not in the Brazilian Agile Alliance conference, not this one, but the one in the United States, right? And also this is explained in his book. I did, to be sincere, I didn't read the book, right? I heard the guy telling that he mentioned this in his book, right? So following this idea, let's continue. Let's go back to our code, right? So what I will try here, the scenario zero for this make no sense, right? So let's start with one item, right? But because if there are 0 items in the cards, of course, we won't have to apply taxes at all, and it's the behavior that we already have, right? So let's add here one item of category tool, yeah, with which prices? Well, let's manage round numbers. So price 1, quantity 10, and the total amount here, given that tools have 10%, this should be 11, right? So I make it run, leaving this an appropriate name, and if it works, then I will put the right name. Well, it should not work, right? Okay, excellent. Yeah. Well, it's not exactly what I was expecting. Expected 11 and actual 0. Well, I would not expect 0. I would expect 10. It's not what I was expecting. It's failing, okay? But it's not the value I was expecting.
Yeah, maybe that's the unit price. If the unit price was 10 and then quantity was 1.
No, I know. What is missing is adding the item to the cart. Because I created the item, but I didn't add it. Okay. Okay, now it is. I was expecting 11 and I get in 10. So
yeah, but Ceci is right. We should have the price as 10 and the quantity as 1.
It shouldn't make a difference, right? The thing I was mean was that the type was an integer, so that's why I would expect not to work the other way around. But
okay.
It seems that the type is double anyway. So
yeah, but yeah, I agree with you. But anyway, with this line, the test was wrong, right? So let's try with this, and then we can have the other case, right? But first, let's make it pass, okay? So to make it pass, we have to see what it's doing here. So it asks the item to calculate the total without taxes, and then we have to add the taxes. And in this case, I will create a simple implementation, right? Item get, well, it's not exposing the category, it seems. I can get the quantity, the price, but I cannot get the category. Okay. Instead of getting the category, I will ask the item to tell me belongs to category tool. Well, here we have like a design decision who is responsible to calculating the taxes, right? So we could discuss that. I would just add it to the card, right? It's not the design is not what I wanted to discuss right now, right? So I will just add this logic here to the card, yeah, and leave the item just be not aware of taxes, right? But look at this. I'm working on the card and I need the item to do something else. So here I am in the situation I mentioned previous. What should I do here? We will mock this method. No, I won't do that. I will go and add this to the item, right? I will have a test for that, right? So I will complete this code and just like to have the structure, and then I will work on the item. So if the item belongs to tool, then I will do the total and item that price. I will multiply for this, and this will be the 10%, right? And we could extract this. Well, let's make this work, and then I will move this to a constant, right? So I will need to add a test here to the item. Here, new item. Okay, I will use this. And item, the new method I added is belongs to category food. Well, this does not exist. Create. Yeah, that way. Method. Yeah, thank you. Is true. Ouch, it's not okay here. Okay, it's not working. I make it pass. So if I'm straight, I should put true here and add another test to make it fail, right? That's the way to be very strict with TDD, right? So this will pass with hard coded, and then I add another test. I should put a name here. Belongs to should be true. When is the category. And this one should be false when is not the category. So this one, office, should be false. Okay, so it is failing. So now I should write this. Okay, that is, this is called category. Return this. Oh, look at this. It is getting the category, but it's not being stored here. This category. Okay, excellent. Let's run all the tests of the item to be sure. And now I should be able to run this. Okay, it worked. And now let's give it a name. Let's say total amount include 10% taxes for tools. And now I run all these tests. Okay, and now I will run the application tests. That was this one. Okay, it worked. So we are done with this feature. I mean, not the whole feature, but the first cut of the feature that is, well, food is already working, tool is applying 10%, office, we didn't work on it. That would be the next case. But let's review what we have done to this point, right? So we added a test from the user perspective, that is this one. And to make this test pass, we write a test for the card, and we write two tests for the item. So if we go back to the Freeman proposal, we have to make this pass, we have to write 3 tests here. And depending on the complexity of the feature, we will have more. In fact, we still didn't complete the feature. We just work on the tool, right? We still have to work on the other categories. So at this point, again, we have the choice. We will add more tests here. I mean, we have to work with the other category. So for the office, we add an acceptance tests, or we just work on the card, because working on the card would be enough, right? What do you think?
Now is amount the effort that we'll dedicate, right? So how many tests we choose to apply in the card size, it's a bit more expensive, you know, right? Like the pyramid, the test pyramid, right?
Ceci?
I agree with Guilherme on that, and maybe I would, in a regular development cycle, I would write the test, and then I would look at my tests again, and then make them fewer and more complete whenever it's done or close to done. So I don't mind writing a lot of tests, but then I would definitely look at the test code by itself and refactor it afterwards.
Yeah, well, what I think is something that is interesting to see here, even when this with this example is small, is the complexity of each of these tests. In this test, the acceptance test, the code is not so complex. I already have to write some helper methods here to manage some complexity that is like a bit hidden given what we have been doing. But something that is very, very visible is how long does it take to run this test? Because these tests are instantiating the whole application, the web context, right? And even when that happened inside the same process and is transparent for me, that made this test slower. And if we were creating an application with a user interface, that will make this test even more slower, because it's possible that we will need to use something like Selenium, a browser. So running those tests will be slower, right? Even more, if we compare that with this test of the card, right, that are like unit tests, That's it. Really, really fast and really, really simple to write. So in this particular case, I will go and continue adding tests at this level. I will add this missing category at the card level, because given that I have the big test at the acceptance level, that is already covering all the infrastructure code that I have in the middle. In some cases, for example, if we try to add this other feature that I decided to delay, that is made the tags explicit, well, for that, yes, I will write another acceptance test, right? Because that making the tags explicit, of course, will imply some changes at the domain level, but also at the controller level. I will have to modify, in this particular case, I will have to modify the application controller to return that value. And if I don't have an acceptance test, that code that I will have to add here will not be covered, right? Well, from the testing point of view, will not be covered, but from a TDD, I need that acceptance test as an excuse to modify this code. I should not modify code if I don't have a test failing, right? Does it make sense to you? Does it sound too crazy? Well, he left, so he thinks.
So I'm sure he was not afraid about your workshop. It was just another thing.
Yeah. I think this is all I have.
I'm so sorry, guys.
No problem.
One accident here in the kitchen.
I have a 2-year-old kid, so I have similar situations all the time. I'm not sure what is this. Oh, it's like a survey. Okay. Yeah. I'm not managing this. I think that is the the organization that is putting this here. Okay, can you translate that for me?
Yeah. So, what's your evaluation, your rating for the session? We ask that in the end of every session. So.
Okay, excellent.
And that's an automatic thing that happens 5 minutes to the end of the time block as well. So.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you. I was guessing that the message, but I wanted just to be sure. So beyond this, before, instead of continue writing code, I want to do like a summary of what we discussed, right? So let's go from the start, right? First, this book is excellent to understand the mechanics of TDD. Something that is very interesting is the emphasis on in working on small steps, right? And be conscious and understand, let's say, that the design is built in increments, right? So you may write something this way now, and you may be modifying it later. Later is not 2 months later. Maybe later is 20 minutes later, right? But I do it differently because I'm working in small increments, right? But this book, in my opinion, is not enough to go and work directly in industry project when you have to deal with legacy code, with infrastructure, with databases and that stuff, right? In my opinion, this is the book that makes the difference, right? Of course, there are some other books about TDD around there, but I think these are the two more important, at least they were for me. And talking about the heuristics, well, we have the London style, the Chicago style, and if you want the Buenos Aires style, I really recommend you to check those videos. But beyond London and Chicago, we could go with the Mokis style. That is what Freeman suggests. In fact, Freeman and Price are the creators of, or collaborators of mocking framework that I think is called JMock. Java is not my, as you may guess, Java is not my preferred language, right? I used to use Java in workshop because it's easy to manage and you just clone and run something that is not so straightforward when you work with Ruby or Python sometimes. But beyond this, we have this question of starting with the happy case or starting with the alternative cases. And in order to help with that, we have the TDDs having guided by zombies. That's the proposal of Groening. And this is all. Just in time.
Thank you so much, Nico.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for participating and stay the whole workshop. I will tweet the slides and some other resources, and I will publish them in Twitter and in my blog also. You can follow me here, and this is my blog. I will post all the materials there. Well,
perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to be part of this, and thank you the organizers for letting me run the workshop.
Thank you.
Muito obrigada a todos que assistiram a gente. Thank you so much, Nico. Logo na sequência nós teremos mais programação às 4 horas. Esperamos que vocês estejam gostando. Esperamos encontrá-los e encontrá-las às 16 horas. Muito obrigada e a gente vai encerrar aqui então. Boa tarde para todos vocês.